with that, I will just share my slide with you and we will go through some key things that I have. There will be many opportunities for you to ask questions, so please feel free to use the chat box to ask your questions. Also feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions. Any of those things are totally up for grabs. All right. So I've got some big words here. I will break some of those down for us just so that we're keeping in mind that this is not a new thing. Integrating youth, what does that really look like? What are some of the tools we have for us? What does listening look like? Listening is an opportunity for us to listen to scripture. What does scripture say about our young people, as well as how are we engaging into listening to them? Co-creating is about key chain leadership. What are some skills and capabilities our young people have that we are underutilizing, and where can we place them in this time of all of that? And empowering our youth is we don't just give them the keys and walk away. We walk alongside them. We mentor them. We create a warm and welcoming environment where mistakes are allowed to happen and where community is the key into seasons of adaptive change. Adaptive change really is when, right now, we're in the middle of COVID. We're all on virtual. What does it look like to use this time of reimagining what the world, what God has to say about our young people to really engage with them? So what is the current realities of our young people right now? Who are they? What does their world look like? We are in the middle of a changing ministry landscape. You know, we are not all gathering in person. We are not all in the same social context. For me, I am in my early 20s. I'm a woman. I'm a person of color. That is a part of my world context. And I'm a part of an intercultural ministry, as in I go to a church that is really leaning into be more multicultural. So we think about these things when we think about what do young people value and care about. They are one of the biggest diverse group of people. So they are hearing very different opinions, very different people. They're just engaging with people that are different from them. And that's part of their context. Another one is that they're digital natives. We are Gen Z. We understand what it looks like to navigate this platform. Zoom, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of these things. They're comfortable communicating online. And for them, that is not an impersonal, cold thing. So for a lot of churches, going online is a great opportunity to engage with young people. And so how do we take these current realities and adapt them in a way that is engaging to them? And lastly, I have some 3 key discipleship tools that I'm going to go walk with you through. I named some of those at the beginning. Key chain leadership. Another one, we will talk about these more and more as we go in. As we talk about key chain leadership, we also talk about biblical teaching. That is actually a discipleship tool that we have available to us. And what does it look like to use that? Lastly, we have our intergenerational relationships. That is also a discipleship tool. So I have a prompting question here, and it's really just, please feel free to unmute yourself and answer some of this question. What are some discipleship tools your church is currently using to engage youth and young adults in your church community? And can you name some of those? And what does that look like? Feel free to use the chat box. Again, what are some key discipleship tools your church is using to engage with young people? And a discipleship tool can look like we are praying together. That is a tool that's available to us. We are in a mentorship program. We have older generation mentoring a younger generation. We have given them opportunities to lead. Are our young people leading Bible study? Are they a part of our worship team? Right now, as a congregation, what is your church doing to walk alongside folks?
One of the things that we're starting in a few weeks is intergenerational. I suppose the best way to say it, the easiest way for everybody to understand is intergenerational Sunday school, where we experience, it'll be on Wednesday nights, but we'll experience a Bible story together and a time of imaginative prayer together. And we'll break everybody up into small groups that will, that are not age specific, but families, intergenerational connections. So that's what we're experimenting with in the next few weeks.
Realized that was on mute. That is a great example, John. Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I have to say that one of the reasons I'm here today is trying to gather some types of tools. We're in Tampa, Florida, and in our immediate congregation, there is more of a leaning towards elderly as opposed to young people and families. Not that we don't have any, we do, and we have some that are engaged in the worship team that might occasionally do a reading or do a piece of music. But of course, with COVID, so much has been shut down. We are still doing actually a taped service. But then we also started on campus the first weekend of June. And, you know, we have probably only about 30 in attendance there. And we have not started back with our Sunday school for the young kids or anything like that. So there is not really any children at the service. So we just had consistory. I'm also an elder this past week. And one of the things that we talked about, the pastor brought up, was the concept of some type of intergenerational grouping, mentorship, whatever. So, you know, we obviously are one of those old line churches that is kind of struggling. We keep trying to reach out to the community. We've done different things on site in the past before the pandemic, you know, trying to get young families to come. We've offered, we had a couple of people who went to the nearby library where they have a Head Start program and offered a shopping day at Christmas where people could drop off their kids for a few hours and have the freedom to Christmas shop without young people attached to them. So we have tried a few things, but not having a lot of success yet. And so that's why I'm here, actually. Sorry I don't have more to offer.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're here. In fact, we will be able to, I have 3 tools that we already have available to us, and I'll walk with you through just how do we adapt those tools to our current reality and communicate that with our young people. So I'm glad you're here because yes, a lot of us are feeling stuck. A lot of us are using the old tools of communicating to reach out to young people, and they're probably, thank you for joining in our chat that came from Calvin is having Youth Sunday, having that opportunity where they're leading. And that is also an example of a tool that has been available to people and that they use. And I am interested in diving a little bit deeper than just let's have our young people lead church on Sunday once a month or every other Sunday. What does it look like to integrate them into every Sunday, whether that is virtual or in person? So our first discipleship tool I want to share with you is this concept of teaching leadership. where the key phrase is collaboration, where rather than just saying, I'm an older person and I have now given you the opportunity to lead Bible study, it is how intentional am I about making sure that you feel empowered to be able to be in this space and to lead in a way that is more hands-off. Teaching leadership doesn't say, I'm going to say, here you go, you can have the keys to the church chapel and we're all going to walk away and watch you make a mess of things. That will scare the heck out of young people. So we don't want to do that. We want to model what it looks like to empower and walk alongside them and to see the potential they have to be leaders. And that is, we wrestle with their interests and their passions, and we're open to asking questions that are open-ended. Teaching leadership says, I want to create an environment where you can thrive. Yeah, and I really like that comment from Jane. So we are going to really lean into that. Key chain leadership is very invitational. It says, how can we utilize the fact that current reality was our young people are very digital. They understand how these platforms work. How can we invite them into those spaces? If we need to go online, how do we make sure we have a young person who's helping us do that? And how do we humble ourselves to ask, hey, we're having a church Sunday. I need somebody to put together this PowerPoint. Would you be willing to do it in a way that is equitable, in a way that we are thinking about our older folks who need to be able to see well, so we make the slides bigger, in a way that is engaging so that, whatever that looks like. How do we provide more opportunities for storytelling mixed in there? Teaching leadership says, we trust that you have lots of great ideas, and we invite you to share those with us. And we remain as open-ended as possible in giving you the space to do that. But also realizing that if you've ever spent time with a middle school, so you don't want to you're not going to get a response the first time, the second time, probably not even the third time. And so how do you remain patient in the process of waiting for your young person to respond to the invitation you have extended to them? And how do you find creative ways of continuing to extend those invitations to your young people? Because it's not going to be a first try and you get it. It's not going to be a second try and you get it. So any questions, any thoughts on key chain leadership? What is my definition of young people? Yes, I think we've got our children's ministry, we've got our youth, and we've got our young people. So youth and young adults. This idea of key chain leadership, so how old are middle schoolers? 12, 11, all the way to your 39-year-old, 40-year-olds. Those are considered young adults today. I don't know how, but that is what it is. And so when you're saying, okay, young adults, if you're thinking about folks in their early 30s, these is parents who just are starting to have kids, who are starting to plant roots in their community, and who are looking around and asking, how can I get plugged in? What are some things I care about? And it's not just, I want to put my child in a Sunday school, but I want to know what else I can do. What skills do I have to offer to my church? And so you're thinking about your older adults, they're still young adults. They're still figuring out what that looks like. And then your youth are really your 13 to 18-year-olds. These are folks who need a lot more walking alongside, need a lot more key chain leadership opportunities, mentorship, where you say, I see you, I hear you, I'm going to continue to press into listening with you, and I'm going to provide resources that aren't just about what can I offer you, but what can you offer me as a church. Is that helpful? for describing our youth and young adults?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you're
Yes,
good.
I asked the question. I'm sorry. Yes, that is helpful because when we say young people, I just needed to get some clarity on that because for me, a young person could be in their 40s. So I just wanted to get some clarity as to what target population you are talking about, and when you say tools for discipleship, what target population are you referring to?
Exactly. Great. In fact, here might be a practical example of a key chain leadership. Let's say you have an adult, somebody in their 40s, 50s, who is currently the person who puts together your church slides. Do you have a young adult person who could do that in their place? And that they might want a break from putting together slides. That is an example of key chain leadership right there. Something simple, something practical, but you're involving them. And they might even have lots of other suggestions, not just PowerPoint. Another way, young people in their early teens and to early 20s is my description of young people. But if you really want a clear generational example, Barna Research has put up some ideas for how they categorize generations. For me, I think that can be quite limiting. So I try not to say Generation Z, it's just a way for us as humans to categorize, and it helps us. Clear data helps us. But at the same time, why I'm saying reimagining these discipleship tools is because they're still here. They exist for us today. So how do we reimagine them in a way that our young adults and youth can understand and be a part of? So just another question for you, and we can all unmute and answer, or again, I continue to encourage you to use the chat, is how are you currently approaching ministry with your students? Your students, as in, this question is specifically for our youth. So your middle schoolers, your high schoolers, college age students, how is your church currently approaching ministry with them? And if you find yourself having a hard time answering this question, that might be a really great place to start. Are you aware of the resources your church is providing for your young people? Are you listening to them, and do they find those resources to be helpful?
I also have a child who's a middle schooler, so I guess I'm right in this, but I see our church leaning on relational engagement right now, especially because COVID makes things hard relationally. So, having small groups of kids get together virtually and talk about something that's important to them. So some relational engagement over download of specific doctrinal content. I mean, both are important, but right now it feels like everyone needs some connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Sunday school still continues to be a big one, I see.
So could I ask, Jane, I'm kind of curious, how did you get your young people into a group to start chatting together? And do you monitor it at all? Do you moderate it is really more, I guess I'm asking, do you give them topics, Do you let them feed you? Like how have you set that up?
Well, I know I'll let John answer because he's done this more, but but they set up groups and there are adult like mentors involved too. So it's not just a group of 12-year-old boys getting on Zoom trying to figure it out.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I tried to group the kids by how well they would work together and fit together. And for our high school, we mostly just got together and just talked for 15, 20 minutes. For the middle schoolers, we actually had a little video that we found online that was about prayer. That was kind of a dramatic, it was a dramatic video about prayer, and we would watch that for about 10 minutes, and then we'd talk for a little bit after that, and then just check in with them each day, or each time we got together. We tried to do it once a week. And it was kind of an accident that we, with the pandemic, we were all locked at home. And so we just figured this was a good way to stay connected with our kids. And so they had regular times each week, 30-minute slots that we would work in. So.
Yeah. I am going to share my screen again and invite you to open up your notes. Just for a quick step-by-step, let's visualize what it looks like to walk and to imagine, just to see who do we have available, young people, right now, and what opportunities do we have available for them that they could potentially be plugged in. So we've described teaching leadership as here's something an adult is doing right now that a young person could be doing instead, because they have the skills and the capabilities to do that. And we continue to extend invitation over and over until they feel comfortable and welcomed into that space. So with that in mind, what are some opportunities your church has right now to invite young people into your community of worship? And can you actually name those young people that might be interested in those things? So take out your notebooks. You've got 2 minutes. Draw out this little chart and start naming. Naming allows us to be able to clearly visualize what this process looks like, right? Here's a practical example. I go to a church. We are a church plant in the city of Grand Rapids called City Chapel. And at the beginning, we had been going back and forth on whether or not we should meet together in person. And we finally decided we will have church in the park. So we go to the park. And I was noticing I wasn't seeing young people as in my age show up, even though there's an opportunity to meet with other people, right? There's all of this space that you can be outside. And young people are saying, we are tired, we are anxious, we are feeling overwhelmed, but we're not plugging into our community. Interesting. So I was like, well, what are some ways that I can help my friends do that? And I decided, well, I do my own morning devotions every day. What would it look like to talk with my friends through a devotion practice? And that is something I have been doing, and it's so fun and it's so easy. It's 5 minutes. I do a devotion and I take notes and I share it with them. So you personally, are you doing your own idea of devotional? What would it look like for you to include a young person in your devotional? Whether that is, I'm going to email this to you and say, I'm thinking about you. Here's a scripture that I read that really spoke out to me. They probably will not respond, and that's okay. But being able to continue to pour into them in a specific way, key. Another thing is we've got lots of young people on our campus right now at church. How are we pouring into them? Are we sending them care packages, even though they're probably far away from you? So what would it look like to say, we're thinking about you. You may not be a part of our church right now, but for you to know that we're sending this to you, we're thinking about you, we're processing life with you, that's just another practical step. And when they know your community is caring, they will most likely show up too. So before we can say, why aren't our young people showing up? we need to be able to ask, how are we showing up for them? How do they know that the space we're creating is warm and inviting? So have you been able to come up with names and ideas of opportunities that young people can get plugged in? If so, please feel free to share some of that. Yeah. Dan just said he's here to learn, what do you do when your children become young adults? And that really is a great question, because that's where I am right now. And I'm pretty sure the church has yet to figure out what to do with me. So I can definitely speak a little bit more into that. My second tool that I have available is scripture. This scripture is key in understanding how we can walk alongside young people. And nobody models what discipleship, what key chain leadership looks like more than Jesus. Because the three questions young people are thinking is, who am I? Where do I belong? And how does my purpose align with God's will? These questions are all answered in scripture. And that is part of why, as Christ followers, being able to model the importance of storytelling is key to bringing young people along in their faith journey. Instead of just saying, again, young people are super passionate about climate justice, about social justice, all of these things. These are all tied to purpose. And realizing right away that Jesus is key to understanding purpose is important for us as we lean forward in being truth seeker and peace builders and community providers. Jesus' discipleship model too was, you are allowed to make as many mistakes as possible. Think about how he treated his disciples. He said, I do, you watch. Now you do, and I'll watch. And there was a time where they did this together, right? He said, go feed my people. And his disciples are like, what? What does that look like? I will model praying with you. What does it look like to model praying with a young person? We already, again, have this key chain leadership available to us through the example of Jesus. And being able to lean into that is a priority for walking alongside young people. Answering the question of anxiety in an anxious world. What does God say about being anxious? How do we remain vulnerable? And how do we live into our Christian practices? Christian practices being, how do we practice prayer, lament, purpose, following in the footsteps of Jesus? How do we practice these practices that are modeled for us? And that goes right back to scripture. And we often use scripture as this, we just quote scripture, but how do we actually live into modeling scripture with young people? And being able to not be afraid of opening our scripture and speaking with them about it is key to bringing young people along. If they're passionate about the environment, we have to be able to say, yeah, God talks about that too. What does he say about that? If they are passionate about a multicultural community, God has something to say about that too. And with all of these, I always have just questions for us to think about as we continue to do that is, who do we listen to? What are we listening for? And how do we listen well? That is what Scripture teaches us to do. Who do we listen to? What are we listening for? And how do we listen well? So I will open that up for us again. Who are you listening to in your congregation? And what are you listening for? And how are you practicing listening well? Are you even in a space where you are asking young people to share with you their ideas, their life stories, their struggles? Who are you listening to? Because before we can even say, what do our young people need? How can we support them? What are some tools we have available? We need to be able to ask them. We need to be able to listen super, super, super well. And listening is one of the key tools of discipleship that we often fail to do.
I recently, in the beginning of the year, as COVID hit, took on the role of our church's disabilities advocate. And we're slowly trying to get it off the ground and making progress. But with not many people actually attending church, there's not too much we can do in that regard yet, but a lot of different things in the works. And I have to say that listening to you now, it drives home a lot of the same type of issues in terms of it's about listening, it's about building relationships so that you can be in a good place for someone to open up and share what their needs are, that they're willing to be vulnerable with you and speak out and say what's on their heart.
Yeah.
I do have opportunity because I have 4 grandchildren. One is only 5 months old, but the other 3, 2 are in their first year of high school and one is in her last year of junior high. And I drove the junior high student to school this morning, and while we're there, we talk a lot. We have a lot of dialogue, which I love, and she shared that she hated school. She's a top-notch student. It comes very naturally to her. And I asked her, I said, I don't think I've ever heard you say that before. So is it about school itself, or is it about the way school is now during COVID? And naturally, that was exactly what she said. And the anxiety and the fear, wondering every day when you go to school, are you going to be sent home because somebody else in your class has tested positive? The anxiety for our young people, and in this case, I guess I'm speaking more to the junior high school, even the grade school kids, but the junior high and the high school kids really have that anxiety. Other ages do as well, but I think they're really vulnerable because they are old enough to appreciate the severity of the situation, and they haven't quite hit that little bit older mentality of I'm invincible, so it's everybody else, not me yet. You know what I mean? So while I'm talking and listening, I'm thinking, number one, that there's probably a way to try and engage, at least as our church opens up a little bit more, try and engage some of the young people in actually my disabilities ministry and kind of draw some of them into that if they're so inclined. But also trying to think of a younger adult than me who might be a good candidate to try and get a group together online to talk about their anxieties with the COVID. I mean, we have that conversation at the dinner table most nights, and it would just be a matter of letting some other kids participate in that conversation via Zoom. And so I really thank John and Jane for that idea. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Our young people are facing anxiety in a way that is new. And interestingly, it parallels well with us right now as youth leaders, church pastors, lay leaders. We're asking, what do we do now that things have changed? And they're asking, we have lost our community. Our community used to be going to school and hanging out with our friends without fear. So how do we build a new community? And that is a place where the church can step in a whole new way. And being able to continue to ask those questions and create an environment where that question can be asked and answered well is a struggle. And honestly, I don't have the answer. I just know here's some of the things that have worked. Some of that has been paying attention to young people who are excited about certain things and asking them, would you be willing to help us move into this space? If you're struggling with getting your church online via Zoom, think about, I have 3 brothers. They are pro at gaming. And interestingly, they're some of the best people to go to for getting set up online. And they have been plugged into my home church in a way that is so beautiful and so unique. And a part of that has been our pastor kept asking them every Sunday through text, through email, would you be willing to serve in this way? Would you be willing to do this? And you know that as you continue to say, I do not have the capacity, I do not have the skills to do this, or maybe you actually do have the skills. Practicing teaching leadership is saying, I could do this, or I could have a young person do this, and be excited that they're willing and interested in leaning into this space and asking them over and over. And their answer might be no, 60% of the time. And that's okay. Just find another person to keep asking. Asking never hurts anyone. So lastly, one scripture I have been really leaning to is 1 Corinthians 3:6, in which we learn that if you're interested in going to that, please pull up your scripture, but it's really one of my favorite scripture about leadership. And it is Paul visualizing you as a gardener, a planter, in which you go in and you plant seeds, you water it, you pray over it, but then you're not in charge of the growth. God is, and there's so much trust and sacrifice that you have to give up. And maybe that's really relieving for you as either a youth leader or a church pastor, that you can continue to pour into this ground, but at the end of the day, it is not your job for that thing to bear fruit. It is Christ's job. And that's where I tend to lean in when we're talking about, well, we've been doing this and this and this and this and this, and our young people are still not grabbing hold and catching on. Well, you do not control the outcome of this fruit and what it produces. God does. Your job is to continue to listen, to continue to water, and to continue to build an environment in which that fruit can grow well. Any questions on scripture and what scripture has to say about how discipleship is done? All right, I will get to my last point. Lastly, we have intergenerational communication or relationships. Let me move to that. Basically, this is where our young adults come in. People like me who grew up in the church, went away to college, came back, and now want to get plugged in. And maybe we're not taken as seriously. And so how do we make sure that when we are providing opportunities for our young adults to be a part of the church community, we see their growth, we see the new person that they have become, and we give them space to join us at the table. And sometimes it means we retire so that they can come in with their new ideas. And I think what the biggest fear when I was growing up in my church, and I asked our pastor, hey, I really want to lead a Bible study with young women of color. And they were like, what? Young people are irresponsible. They don't always show up. They don't do this or that. And big part of that is true. There is huge risk where young people say, can I lead? And then they don't follow through. And that's what, again, that's where teaching leadership you lean into making sure you're walking alongside them and you're providing them with the resources and the tools to empower them in a way that says, I am listening, I am walking with you, and I'm slowly letting you go so that you are able to do this on your own. It's literally just like driving. You don't just give your kid keys and say, go drive. You get in the car with them and you practice in the parking lot, and then you take them out into the street. But first they got to read the book, right? They need to know, what does the stop sign look like? What does crossing the train tracks look like? All of that. So you create building blocks so that when your young person comes and says, I'm ready to do this, you know that they are, because you've been walking with them through the process of community building. And being able to renegotiate an adult relationship is one thing that I am in the process of doing right now. We're living into the tension of how do we make sure that we still feel skilled and helpful for our community, but at the same time, we're still learning. We're still figuring out the ropes. How do you give us space to make mistakes and know that we're not going to be flaky on you, right? And I know that some of the best places that I have learned that I am trusted and I'm listened to has been through older folks. I've gone hiking with older folks because they've invited me onto their physical journey, and how exciting it is to go hiking with, because that's an opportunity for them to listen and to listen so well. But at the same time, you're practicing spiritual rhythm. What does it look like to look healthy and be healthy? So that is what intergenerational relationship allows us to do. When we are, it's not just the parents' job to bring their kids up into faith, but it's also the church as a whole, is the grandparents, is that random aunt and uncle, is that church pastor, it's that youth leader, it is that also random church lay leader. How are we making sure that we are intentional about listening to our young people and providing the environment so that when they are growing up, we know that they will come back to our church or they'll go to another community and they're able to plug in. Do you have any questions related to what it looks like to build an intergenerational community?
Ruth, one
Mm.
way to build relationships with young people is to do some mission work together, to work together,
Yes.
doing something outside of themselves, because not only do they learn about themselves, but they also learn how to apply scripture to their lives, and the scripture becomes alive. And you build relationships that you wouldn't get in any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, and how do we do that in the pro-COVID world? How do we create a missional community when you can't go overseas? But at the same
Well,
time, you church that is currently right there, that has a community. Are you going on a prayer walk? If so, have you thought about inviting young people with you? We've got kids who are afraid of going to school because they might catch COVID. Maybe walk with them on their church campus or your school campus and pray with them about some of their fears. That is living into a missional community, but also being aware of COVID.
you can also do a food drive and pick up food from people's homes when they can't bring it to the church. And that's another way of reaching out. Habitat for Humanity also work in their gardens. You have to be a certain age for that, but that's local work that can be done physically distanced with masks.
Yeah, I did providing care packages for our young people. We can also provide care packages for our older people. What would it look like to encourage our youth group to put together a care package for an older person and send it to them? So all of that to say, at the end of the day, keychain leadership, biblical teaching, and intergenerational relationships are three building blocks that allow us to lean into an adapting, changing world where young people are the key focus of our work. When we practice being vulnerable and opening our hands and saying, I'm willing to let go of this thing that I've been doing so that a young person can do it instead, that's an opportunity to invite them into a whole new way of being and to say, we trust you, we care about you, and we're super excited to see the skills and gifts that are being blossomed within you. And we lean into scripture when we say, I see you, I see how gifted you are, and I want to walk alongside you as you continue to sharpen some of those gifts. And we make sure that we surround them with people who are older than them, younger than them, who are plugging into their lives. Because no matter what we do, we're worried about losing our young people in church. We're worried about the fact that they don't care about God. All of that is untrue. And we need to be able to really pay attention and listen and ask good questions so that we are able to provide them with the needs and resources they're really looking for. That is all I have today. So if you have any questions, I'm opening it up for that right now. If you are interested in being resourced further, especially by the next generation engagement, because these are questions we're being asked all the time, and we actually have practical tools for you, please feel free to email us, and we will love to share some of our resourcing with you in those areas. And our team is Pat, myself, and I do the growing young stuff, and Jeff. So if you're really interested in asking more and more questions related to young people and how can we resource them and listen to them, yeah, feel free to connect with me. We would love to do that walk that talk with you. Folks, any further question that we can discuss with you? This again will be free for you to listen to later. I'll also provide my slides if that's helpful. Thank you so much for being here with me and listening. What a great way to practice our first keychain leadership. You just listen to a young person. Thank you.